The air inside cell block 42 always tasted of rust and stale sweat. It was a sprawling, subterranean labyrinth known simply as the Under, a supermax facility where sunlight was a myth and hope was the first thing to die. Here, the law of the land wasn't written in penal codes, it was inscribed on knuckles and shanks. It was a world governed by brute force, illegal betting rings, and a hierarchy carved out of flesh and bone. At the apex of this food chain stood Marcus, known to everyone as the Cell Giant. Standing nearly 7 feet tall, Marcus was a monolith of muscle and scar tissue. His skin was a tapestry of old violence, marking him as a survivor of countless brawls. Rumor had it that his bones were reinforced with steel rods and that he felt no pain. No one had ever knocked him down. In the brutal ecosystem of the Under, Marcus was the apex predator, the undisputed king. At the very bottom lay Leo. Leo was an anomaly in a place like this. He was affectionately, or rather, derisively, called the weakest kid. Skinny to the point of emaciation, with pale, translucent skin and a persistent, hacking cough, he looked like a gust of wind could shatter him. He walked with his shoulders hunched, hugging the walls, trying to make himself invisible. His eyes, large and perpetually wide with fear, darted around constantly, scanning for threats. He was the scavenger, the bottom feeder who ate the scraps left behind, surviving only because he was deemed too insignificant to crush. The catalyst for the fight that would shake the foundations of the Under began with a simple, clumsy accident. The mess hall was a cacophony of shouting voices and clattering metal trays. The air was thick with the smell of boiled cabbage and unwashed bodies. Leo was navigating the crowded aisles, clutching his tray with white-knuckled desperation. He was trying to reach a quiet corner, his eyes fixed on the floor. He didn't see the boot. The hammer. Marcus's right-hand man, a brute almost as wide as he was tall, had stretched his leg out. Leo tripped. The tray flew from his hands, flipping in the air before landing squarely on the hammer's lap. Gray, lukewarm slop splattered across the man's prison blues. The mess hall went silent. It was a heavy, suffocating silence, the kind that precedes a storm. Hundreds of inmates froze, spoons hovering halfway to mouths, eyes locked on the terrified boy and the enraged giant rising from the bench. "You little rat!" The hammer growled, his voice a low rumble that vibrated in Leo's chest. He wiped a glob of slop from his chest and flicked it onto the floor. "Do you have any idea what you just did?" Leo couldn't speak. His throat had closed up. He shook his head frantically, backing away until his spine hit the cold concrete of a pillar. The hammer stepped forward, a cruel grin spreading across his face. He raised a fist the size of a cinder block. "I'm going to turn you into paste." Just as the blow was about to fall, a deep, resonant voice cut through the tension. "Stand down." The crowd parted like the Red Sea. Marcus approached, his movements slow and deliberate. He didn't walk, he glided with the heavy, assured momentum of a glacier. He stopped between the hammer and Leo, towering over both of them. The hammer hesitated, his fist still raised. "Boss, he dumped his slop on me. I'm just teaching him a lesson." Marcus looked at the hammer, then down at the trembling Leo. His expression was unreadable, a mask of stone. "He's not worth the energy, hammer. Look at him. He's already broken." The hammer lowered his hand. Grumbling, but he obeyed. In the Under, Marcus's word was absolute. But as Marcus turned to leave, something happened that no one expected. Leo spoke. It was barely a whisper, a croak from a dry throat, but in the dead silence of the hall, it carried. I'm not broken." Marcus stopped. He didn't turn around immediately. The silence stretched, becoming unbearable. Slowly, the cell giant pivoted. He looked down at Leo, really looked at him, perhaps for the first time. There was no fear in the kid's eyes anymore. There was terror, yes, but beneath it, something else flickered. A spark. A desperate, insane spark of defiance. Marcus tilted his head, amused. "What did you say, little man?" Leo pushed himself off the pillar. His legs were shaking so hard his knees knocked together, but he stood his ground. He took a breath that rattled in his chest. I said. I'm not broken. And I won't let you or anyone else treat me like trash anymore. A ripple of laughter went through the room. It started low and erupted into raucous guffaws. The weakest kid standing up to the cell giant? It was the funniest joke they had heard in years. But Marcus didn't laugh. He stepped closer, invading Leo's personal space, his shadow engulfing the boy completely. Is that so? Marcus whispered, his voice dangerously soft. You think you're tough? You think you deserve respect? I deserve to exist. Leo stammered. Marcus grinned, but there was no warmth in it. It was the grin of a wolf spotting a lamb that decided to bare its teeth. Then prove it. Friday night. The pit. You and me. The laughter died instantly. The pit was where disputes were settled in blood. It was where men went to get maimed or worse. For Marcus to challenge Leo, it wasn't a fight. It was an execution. I accept, Leo said before his brain could catch up with his mouth. Marcus chuckled, a dark, heavy sound. Friday night then. Try not to die of fright before then, kid. As Marcus walked away, leaving a stunned silence in his wake, Leo slumped against the pillar, sliding down until he hit the floor. What had he done? He had just signed his own death warrant. He had 72 hours to prepare for a fight against a human mountain. But as he looked at his trembling hands, Leo realized something strange. For the first time since he arrived in the Under, he didn't feel like a ghost. He felt terrified, nauseous, and doomed. But he also felt alive. The countdown had begun. And unknown to everyone, including Leo, the fight no one expected was about to reveal secrets that the Under had buried deep, secrets about strength, about will, and about who Leo really was. The 72 hours following the declaration in the mess hall were not measured in minutes, but in heartbeats. For Leo, each beat was a violent thud against his ribs, a reminder that his biological clock was winding down. News in the Under traveled faster than a virus. By the time Leo returned to his cell, a damp, claustrophobic cube of concrete, the entire prison population knew. The betting pools were already open. Toothless Jim, the block's resident bookie, had set the odds at 5,000 to 1. It wasn't a bet on whether Leo would win, it was on how he would lose. Would it be a broken neck in the first 10 seconds? A coma? Or would Marcus simply crush his skull like a ripe melon? Leo sat on the edge of his cot, his hands trembling. The adrenaline that had propelled him in the cafeteria had evaporated, leaving behind a cold, desolate terror. He was a shadow, a ghost who survived by being unnoticed. Now, he had painted a target on his back the size of the sun. When the cell door buzzed open for recreation hour, Leo couldn't hide. He stepped out onto the gantry, feeling hundreds of eyes on him. They were looking at him the way one looks at a car crash, with morbid curiosity and pity. He retreated to the prison yard, seeking the furthest corner near the rusted weight benches. He sat on the ground, staring at the gray dirt until a voice like grinding gravel broke his trance, telling him he was breathing wrong. Leo jumped, scrambling backward. Sitting in the shadow was a man Leo had seen 1,000 times but never really noticed. He was old, with skin like tanned leather and milky, unsettling blue eyes. They called him Silas. He was a lifer, someone who had been in the Under since before the walls were repainted. Silas told him he was hyperventilating, explaining that oxygen wasn't getting to Leo's brain and that panic would kill him before he even stepped into the pit. Leo whispered that he was already dead, gesturing toward Marcus, who was bench-pressing concrete blocks across the yard. Silas finally turned his head, his milky eyes piercing. He asked Leo if he knew how to move a mountain. When Leo said you couldn't, Silas corrected him with a crooked smile. You erode it, he said, or you find the fault line and let gravity do the work. The old man asked why a coward like Leo had stood up to him. Leo looked at his thin, fragile hands and admitted he was tired of disappearing. He wanted to be seen just once. Silas called it dangerous pride but useful. He told Leo he couldn't teach him strength in 70 hours, as muscles took years to build. But physics was instant, and biology was immutable. Silas began sketching in the dirt, explaining that Marcus was big, which meant momentum. Marcus relied on fear and hadn't had to actually fight in years. He just smashed. That made him lazy and predictable. Silas asked Leo if he wanted to truly live, and when Leo breathed a yes, Silas commanded him to stop shaking and listen. He promised to teach him how to break a giant. For the next 2 days, the yard became a classroom of anatomy and leverage. Silas taught Leo about the vagus nerve, the solar plexus, and the floating ribs. He explained that the human knee is structurally pathetic against lateral force. He predicted that Marcus would charge with a right haymaker. If it connected, Leo would die. But Silas insisted this was an opportunity, because a swing that big opened Marcus's entire right side. At that moment, he wouldn't be a fighter, he would be a falling building. You don't block a building. You step into the void it creates. You become the tripwire. They practiced the movement for hours: duck, step, pivot. Silas made Leo do it until his legs burned, constantly telling him to be like water flowing around a rock. Silas also forced Leo to analyze Marcus as a machine. He pointed out how Marcus favored his left leg due to an old injury, noting that he didn't put full weight on it when he turned. That was his fault line. Leo began to see the slight limp and the way Marcus telegraphed his anger. The fear didn't vanish, but it was being managed and converted into focus. On Thursday night, the atmosphere in cell block 42 was electric. Even the guards had money on the fight. Leo lay on his cot, running through Silas's instructions: duck, step, pivot, strike the knee, pray. A shadow fell over his cell bars. It was Marcus himself. The giant stood there, his hands gripping the bars, looking like a mythical ogre. But up close, Leo saw the scars and the boredom in his eyes. Marcus noted with a hint of disappointment that Leo hadn't run. Leo stood up, standing toe-to-toe with the giant, and repeated that he wasn't broken. Marcus studied him, searching for a tremor but finding only resolve. He told Leo it wasn't personal, just order: the strong eat, the weak are eaten. If he let Leo live, the system would crumble. When Leo suggested the system might be wrong, Marcus laughed, saying there was no right or wrong in the under, only gravity. Friday arrived like a funeral procession. The pit was a drained swimming pool in the deepest level of the prison, stained with decades of blood. Floodlights cast harsh beams into the center. The noise was deafening as hundreds of prisoners packed the balconies, chanting Marcus's name until the dust shook from the ceiling. Leo stood in the tunnel, bare-chested and sallow, looking like a sacrifice. Silas was beside him, placing a grounding hand on his shoulder. He told Leo that Marcus fought with history, but Leo had to fight with the present. Don't think about winning, he said, just the next second. When Leo admitted his fear, Silas grinned, saying fear made you fast. He told Leo to be a survivor. The announcer's voice boomed over the PA, introducing Marcus as the king of the under and the breaker of bones. The crowd erupted as the giant emerged, soaking in the adoration. Then the announcer introduced Leo as the appetizer and the walking corpse. Booze and garbage filled the air. A cup of water splashed at Leo's feet as he walked to the center. The noise faded into a dull buzz. All he could see was Marcus. The giant cracked his neck with a sound like a gunshot and smiled, but then he paused. He saw Leo's stance. Feet apart, knees bent, hands positioned, one low, one high. It was professional. The referee, a corrupt guard named Miller, warned them: no weapons, no biting. He sneered at Leo, telling him to make it last a minute, then blew his whistle and stepped back. For 10 seconds, nobody moved. The crowd was confused. Marcus was wary because the technical stance bothered him. Someone screamed for Marcus to smash him, and his ego took the bait. He let out a roar and charged. The ground shook. He closed the distance in 2 strides, throwing the massive right haymaker Silas had predicted. It was a blow meant to cave in a chest. Leo watched it come in slow motion. He saw the shoulder tense and the weight shift. Leo dropped his level, ducking as the wind of the fist ruffled his hair. He stepped deep into Marcus's guard. right next to the bad left leg. He pivoted. Leo didn't punch, he didn't have the power for that. Instead, he hooked his leg behind Marcus's injured knee and shoved his shoulder with every ounce of his weight into Marcus's hip. Leverage met momentum. Marcus, committed to the force of his own punch, hit the tripwire. His bad knee buckled under the pressure. The giant stumbled. He didn't fall yet, but he lurched forward, his balance destroyed, crashing into the tiled wall. The crowd gasped, a collective intake of breath. Marcus hadn't touched him, and yet the giant had stumbled. He turned around, his face twisted in shock and rage. He looked at Leo, who was bouncing on the balls of his feet, eyes wide and breathing rhythmically. Marcus hissed, calling him an insect. Leo didn't speak, he just remembered Silas's voice. Erode the mountain. The weakest kid beckoned with his hand, telling the giant to come on. The roar that followed wasn't for Marcus anymore. It was the sound of the impossible becoming possible. Marcus charged again, faster and wilder, but Leo was smoke. He was water. For the first time, the giant looked slow. The real fight was just starting,